And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rob and Ezio. I'm going to hand you over to Rob, who's going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. So welcome today internationally to the globe. It's truly amazing to be part of this conversation. So it is a great honour to introduce somebody who's been working within the last 2 decades, specifically within the field of sustainability and also around social innovation. I know that my students within DP will have read quite a bit of his work. He started the DCIS network, and he is a distinguished professor of design for social innovation at El Silvia Design School and Engineering in Barcelona, and he's an honorary professor in so many places and institutions. It's great. It's been great to talk to Ezio before we've come together today, but especially 2 of his most recent books have shaped my personal thinking a great deal. Design When Everybody Designs, and also Politics of the Everyday. I think 2 things also that are really important to say is that Ezio was awarded the Sir Misha Black Award in 2012, and then also the Compostoro de la Tierra in 2016, one of the oldest and most influential international design awards established in Italy in 1954. So it is an absolute honour to have this dialogue with yourself, sir. And I think it's going to be quite a flamboyant conversation, which I really look forward to. So first of all, I'm going to just jump in and go. Ezio, can you give us an overview of your last few months working with the communities that you've been in, especially in your hometown and in your city?
Yes, thank you, Rob, and hello to everybody. And I think that my life has not been in this own structure, very different from probably the majority of you. So I participate to several communities. The one, the virtual one, the global virtual one, went on very well. If the number is an indicator, it went very well. In terms of quality, I don't know, but in any case, it was very dynamic. My physical one, my community with people together, okay, as for everybody, it has been a disaster because everything more or less disappeared. So we all found ourselves, and it's valuable also for me, spending the day in the place where I am physically, but mainly inside the computer, traveling in the digital space wherever in the world. And now that in Italy we have the possibility, since now more than 2 weeks, to go out, I see, and this could be also one of the topic of our discussion, that to restart to have relationships in the real world is not so easy. It's not so easy because some people is still worried. I don't know, maybe it's correct or not. But also because I think that this technology is so handy, so useful, so easy to be used, that we become a little bit lazy. So why you should take the risk to go outside, to expose yourself with the other, to start conversation, if you can do it online. And therefore, for what regard myself, and to conclude this question, and to position myself, I am leaving my home. I'm lucky because I live in the countryside, near to a village that is very, very active, that has been very active until before the COVID. And now I see that we start to re-establish, to reweave the people together, but it's not so obvious. So we have to do something, and I participate to some association, some local association here. So we have to do something to restart the conversation that in some way has been broken. And this is really, if you want, this is a ultra small cases, my village, but it's a little bit the core of our story. So what we call community, and maybe afterward we will see better, do not exist by nature, the new ones. Somebody has to do it. And if for some reason they have been disassembled or they melted, you have to work to make them to restart. And this is what we are trying to do now here, to restart. We call it, how we call it, spaced, social but spaced. So a kind of, the fact that to maintain this distancing do not mean that we cannot have a social life. It's a kind of, maybe also in your school, it's used a certain term, a kind of different etiquette. So in England, you cannot talk with another people nearer than half a meter. In Italy, maybe it's 30 centimeters. And now with this new etiquette, you cannot be nearer than 1.5 meters. And we have to reinvent our way to socialize, assuming that we cannot get directly in touch. But as I was discussing with somebody else before, we can be in touch without touching until it will be necessary. So to be in touch, and what does it mean to be in touch? In my view, is something more than what we are doing now. So now we are in touch in a broad way in the world, but I talk with everybody. It's a way to be in touch. We are not creating something related to the place. So to be in touch in a place without touching. So this is the new way in which we have to learn how to do, at least for, unfortunately, a long period.
Thank you. So part of the topic has obviously come out of some of your writings, and I think it's a really interesting place and space that we're discussing. Also, how long it exists for, its time, is it immediate? And can you just define what you mean by communities of place a bit more so that we can sort of unpick that?
Okay, thank you, Rob, because you know that this is a little bit the core of my worries and my preoccupation, and so I like to try to make it clear, because I use, as everybody of us use the term community, but we have to know that it's a very complicated term that has a very long story, and in this moment it's also very slippery. So it could be also dangerous. So we have really to try to understand what we mean. But before that, let me say why I think that is so important. I think that is so important because we live in a period in which there are, I will say, three main big threads. They are much more complex, but let's simplify in this scheme. There is what has been dominant in the past 2 or 3 decades. That is a neoliberal economy and neoliberal ideology that mainly brings toward individualization and virtualization and displacement. I'm not explaining, I hope that is sufficiently clear. And at a certain point, there has been a contra trend, the one in which many people, probably many of you, and also modestly myself, started to work against this one. And so it was clear that if we had the idea, was proposed the idea of a society that do not exist, as said your Mr. Thatcher many years ago, but only individuals, the opposite is no, we have to recreate groups. We have to recreate groups capable to collaborate, to do something together, because a society is rich because it's done by this kind of mesh of many different social networks like these ones. And therefore, at that point, it was complicated but sufficiently clear. There was the bloody one, they wanted to have only individual, and was talking about this globalization, a kind of flatland in which there are only individual everywhere and nothing else. And on the other side, there were the good guys, there was us, that was trying to put people together, to do something together, to be linked to the environment in which we are, etc. Unfortunately, the disaster that has been generated by the trend number 1 has been so big that another trend emerged that is also bad and very bad. We can call it the trend number 2. And so we call trend number 3 the one of the us, in which people started to talk about the local, the community, the us against you, the American first, English first, Italian first, etc. And those people are using some of our, what was before considered to be our terminology. First of all, we are talking about community, the community, and we are talking about place, the place. And therefore, now we are in a very difficult condition, because the one thing that we are saying when we say community and place is for sure not the one of the trend number 1, that is elimination, nothing as a community and nothing as a place, but also not the one that are now promoted by this reactionary way of talking about community and place, that in short is us against you, my place against the other place. So we have to find a way, what does it mean to give value to the idea of doing things together, to be a community? What does it mean to build a place that we can recognize as our place, but at the same time avoiding to close this community, to close these places in us against you? And so the key word is open. So we cannot tell always, because it will be boring, but we should say open community, open places, because this is the characteristic that make these, I call it the contemporary communities, the communities that are looking forward, and that, in my view, are so important, because, of course, the crisis, the catastrophes, plural, in which we are so big that many different levels of intervention will be needed. But nevertheless, I think that also the intervention at a more global scale, if it will be in the right direction, there is a molecular dimension, that is a dimension in which human beings enter in relationship with other human beings in a place. So I'm not saying the moving from these notions, this molecular level, the community in a place, the interaction in between human being in a place is the only thing, and if we do it, we have solved the problem. But there is no big law, no big normative, no big activity that can be done that could really bring us in the right direction if at the basis we don't have the capability to rebuild a society that could be contemporary society, capable to face all the difficulties in which you are working with the resilience that is given by communities in place. Therefore, community, contemporary community, a community by choice, as opposed to the community of the past, so you choose to enter. A community built around some topic, so the people, it's a kind of conversation in between people. People have to have something to talk about, and they have to be designed. But afterward, they cannot be directly designed, but you can design something that helps this community to exist. So by choice, on some topic, and designed by somebody. And many of this community, if not all of them, should have a discussion about the place, about the space in which they are. So if you have a discussion about the space in which you are, you create places. So the community generate the transformation of space in place. That is a space with a community that is talking about it.
Thank you very much. Just to be aware to everybody in the room, thank you. Every now and again, I'm just looking at the fantastic questions that are popping up. We will try and get to as many later in the session as possible, but they're very provocative. So thank you for sharing those with us. So going back to that, have you got any examples, Ezio, of good practice of communities of place? Maybe you work in Barcelona, or sort of expand upon that, because I think, you know, we're talking about this within a context, and I think it's really important that people in this room understand that context of how this came to be.
Yes, well, I have to say that even though we live in a very, very difficult moment, dramatic, more than dramatic, and the other big trend that I mentioned before are terribly strong, but the story that I'm telling today is much stronger than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So I will do some example, but it has to be clear that talking about what we are talking now, today, we have to refer to something that is not only the traditional idea or the typical grassroots organization. I just come to say the grassroots is very important, but the grassroots can happen into systems that are larger than that. So today, even though we are not in a good shape altogether, but we are not starting from zero. So we are starting from an history, experiences that are already very long. And this has also generated the fact that not only group of very active people, kind of guerrilla-like people doing gardening, doing food, doing something, it's also some institutions that are starting to change the mentality. Just to give an example, the new mayor in Paris that are being re-elected has been re-elected with a flagship program that is the 15-minute city. The 15-minute city is a city in which you can get practically, not all, let's say all, but it will not be all, but a lot of what you need in your life in a radio of 15 minutes walk. And this is a program that permitted to this lady to gain the election in Paris. So this at the moment is a program. So you can say, okay, they could be word, but if she dared to do it, given that for sure they make some poll, they have some ideas of what is happening, it means that the society is relatively ready, because otherwise she could not win the election with this kind of story. And to make another example, and you was mentioning Barcelona, why? Two motivation. One, for what regard myself, in this moment, I'm working in Barcelona with a school of design that is Elisava, and in collaboration with the city council. And what is most important than that is that in Barcelona, the idea of the 15-minute city, that in Barcelona is a 10-minute city, is not only an idea, because the idea came already at least more than 2 decades ago. And in this long period, they have been capable to start to implement it, and they call it a super block. In Catalan, it's a superillas. And the super block are to cut the city in a certain way. The center of Barcelona is very simple to be done, but it can be done everywhere. And having part of the city of around, in the case of Barcelona, 8,000 people, and creating a condition in which we can approximate the idea of having everything you need at 10 minutes walk from where you are. And the way in which they did it, it was starting from changing totally the idea of mobility. Now I don't have the time to enter in, but changing the idea of mobility, they free a lot of space in the street, and in the crossroad become square, and they intervene in that, and that create platform in which a new kind of activities, and afterward the social sector of the city develop the idea of the social superillas. That means how we can distribute the social services at this level of the 10 minutes walk, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why it could happen? Because you can say, okay, this is a top-down decision. Yes, because as I said before, at a certain moment you need a top-down decision. But for Barcelona, I can say for sure, it could not happen if in Barcelona there will not have been a lot of grassroots organizations. So you cannot impose something like this to people that do not want. So you maybe can impose from the top something else, but you cannot impose from the top something that asks to the people to be active. And therefore, it's a kind of dialogue, as it should be, from the bottom up, the grassroots organization, the top down, the institution, that at a certain point can stabilize some element and create that the entire idea of the city become that kind of idea. But to have this idea, it needs that people want it and people understand it. In some ways, they stay at the rule of the game.
Yes, it's how it's catalyzed, which I think that relationship between the top down and the grassroots and how that proliferates over time is really important. I think that's absolutely critical. So just moving on. We've discussed, it's been an honor to discuss and have a bit of back and forth about different working styles and share some of my work with your work. And so within the My Nature Watch project, we created an online and sort of physical hyper-local set of communities because they were distributed over the country and people were able to engage with things in a different way. We found that linking novices and experts was really, really critical. And we found that sort of, again, leveraging expert networks within these kind of communities of place was critical to give agency to people. Can we just unpick what you think the other elements or attributes, the building blocks that go into these ideas of communities of place so that we can start to design to direct toward or away or pitfalls?
Yeah, thank you. And I've seen the project that you talk about, and congratulations for you. It's very interesting. And let's say, I can say something a little bit more general, and afterward I go to your project in particular. I said before, you cannot design directly a community. Why? Because a community is a kind of conversation in between people. It's a relationships. And you cannot design relationship, luckily, because the people is people. But you can generate conditions that help this kind of conversation happen and to move on and to become active, etc. And in my and our experience, we have already, not only me or my group, my DASIS group, but many others now in the world, experience of design for social innovation. We can put everything under two main umbrellas. One is infrastructuring. So it means to create, to design, to input in the environment some element that could be the idea of infrastructure that normally we have that help to make something happen. So they are physical or not physical, but in any case, some artifact that can be plug in the system to create more positive conditions to make things happen. So, for instance, if in Barcelona they free from the car many streets and it became empty from cars, this is a typical new infrastructure. So people have a place where something can happen. It's not clear what will happen, but you create the conditions for. It's clear? So you create conditions, platforms in which people can dance, do something. This is the basic, because very often to have a new community is so difficult because the environment is very hostile to make it happen. But the second element, and there is a lot to design this kind of environments, this kind of infrastructure. The second element is more tricky, and maybe some of designers as us could feel, and is that if we say that the contemporary communities are people that do something together. So I use the metaphor of a conversation for action. But to have a conversation, you need not only a place to make this conversation, but you need some topic to talk about. So what can happen is that people sometimes do not have the ideas. And therefore you can introduce in the system some element that I call relational objects that become the topic of conversation of people. So the topic around which people can start a conversation, start to do something together. And designer can do a lot of action, a lot of design initiative that can bring to a physical product, but could be also a performance. It could be also a kind of I don't know, a scenario. It could be whatever that could feed the conversation. And I think that a project like yours, before entering in particular on what you do, but it's typically a relational object. So people probably were never thought to go around to make pictures in that way and to create this kind of, you propose, look, with this object and the kind of, probably you also said how to use it. So it was not only an object, probably it was a product service system that was proposed to help people. People say, oh, look, we could do this. We could also participate in a new sensitivity around the nature. And therefore, they can start two things, as always it happens. There is the direct result, the kind of picture they do and how it is used. And there is what has been until now the main center of my discussion, a kind of side effect that is to create sociability. So to do together pictures of nature, at the same time you have to do something together, you have to coordinate and you create one of those elements of a community. So every time that you do like this, you get, let's say, the direct result. Maybe people go together to have access to food, to take care of the kids, to organize a party, whatever you can imagine. So you have a first result, but there is always a second result. If they are doing in a certain way, that to get that result, people have to collaborate. Collaborating, you generate capability to listen, mutual trust, empathy. So all those social qualities, social value that today in the trend number 1 and 2 are missing. So to create this conversation for action, if it is well done, generate social capital, generate social value, I prefer to say, the social capital. On the top of this, in your case, there is another story, but it opened a very different line of discussion. That is, as I did when you make my question, when you asked me some question, I answered some example of a social innovation that more or less have to get something that is a solution of a social problem. We do it in a collaborative way, and in this way we generate some social value. In general, in all this discussion, the environmental or ecological dimension was not so clear. So all the cases that I can mention, at least do not hurt the environment, and very often they have also some good environmental issues. But personally, I think, and here we are entering in the area that is far less experience than before, that we should, given what is happening, imagine a new wave of social innovation, mainly driven directly by ecological motivation. So until now, we have had a wave that started more than 20 years ago of social innovation. It was by, I don't now go back what has been the motivation and the context of that. In any case, it was mainly driven by big social problems that exist and will exist. And so I hope that will remain. But now we have the environmental catastrophe is so big that I think that a new wave of social innovation should happen where the driver is more directly a different sensitivity toward the environment. And therefore, I appreciate a lot those examples, as is also yours, for what I understand, that try to indicate as a good result to be obtained by a group of people to go together, to have discussion, to organize something for a goal that is mainly a goal related to the environment. Afterward, I will say that the second, doing this in this way, they in any case produce social value. because in any case they have to collaborate, in any case they have to trust each other, in any case they have to listen to each other, etc., etc. But they do all this more directly for an environmental or ecological motivation. And I think there are some signals of this. Unfortunately, now the COVID has a little bit broken. So what I'm saying now was clearer before the COVID crisis. And now everything has to be in some way restarted. But it was clear that it was the beginning of a new wave of social innovation driven by environmental and ecological issue. And I hope, and I'm working now to restart it, it's not me that can restart it, but in any case, to modestly collaborate, to integrate what we have learned from the COVID for the good and for the bad, and to reintegrate with the story about the environmental issue, because the environmental problems are there, are not out. They are still there, even though people have not talked about them so much. And to have a new social innovation driven by environmental motivation, I think that is probably the big challenge of the next future.
Absolutely. Which so in a minute we will launch some polls of some questions that we have to kind of test the temperature of the room, and then some of the questions will come to an end because we've received some amazing ones internationally. So my last question is, what are the products, services or systems that we should be focusing on creating within these communities? Now, that's a very big question, but I think the most important element of it is to transition out of COVID-19. What can designers do to help? Because they're all packaged and it's contextual.
Yeah. But let me say before, to be very clear, for me at least, design for social innovation is not a design discipline. So it's not, you cannot, you know what, now we teach you design for social innovation. To work, it's called design, oh, sorry. He had to happen.
It did have to happen. Well, like I said, I'm quite impressed at my two children downstairs having some hot chocolate and not bursting in to see me. We thought it would happen at either end.
Okay. So every possible design competence, skill, or if we want to call it discipline, can bring the contribution. And because it's what is the contribution that you can bring to help a process that has its own story, etc., etc. So for sure, communication, every kind of communication. 100% and mostly, probably is the most evident today, everything that is related to digital platforms, because today there is no one social innovation that is not based, maybe very simple, maybe simply Facebook group, or even a WhatsApp group, but nothing is happening today in these fields that is not based on some digital device. And the digital device, as you know, this is we can keep it for a new conference. Could be good and bad, so it depends. But they are changing the rule in any case. You know that sentence they say, technology is not good, not bad, but also not neutral. So we have to understand the new rules of the game that they are proposing, because very often they can be used and if also bring away from this collaborative way of doing. And so some good idea at the end lose and become something completely different. If you say, to say the big evil, the Uber was a nice group of people sharing the car. And it became what it is, a monster. Therefore, it's to say there is a lot to design. So it became a monster for economical motivation, etc., but somebody designed it. So it's very important how you design that kind of things. But so for sure, one of the big challenge in this moment is how we can generate digital devices that instead of melting the society, splitting in individual, closed in their own home, having a society which help to reorganize the people in the places, in reweaving people and people with places. So, as I say, this could be one session, only this point, because it's so rich, there are so many things. I already say communication. If we have to imagine how this third trend could be stronger, we should have a clear vision and scenario and the luck. So this is another possible discussion for another day. The strength in the reality, the number of people that participate to this kind of activities are so high that we always are disappointed. And when people vote or when people express themselves politically, these do not appear. And so one of the big issues that is in discussion between who deal with the story is how is possible that is such a strength in the reality, and when we vote, we are still so weak. And there is several motivations, but for sure one motivation is that the vision that we propose are not solid enough. People really do not believe. So when you have to organize your farmer market in your neighborhoods, you understand very well what it is. But when you think to the market in general, you cannot imagine. So we are not able. So, and this is communication, scenario making, vision, arts also, of course. I talk always about design because I'm more designer, but in similar thing could be said. But also products, because at the beginning the social innovation normally use already existing products. So when we started years ago, it looks like the product have no role, because if you have to have a car sharing, you use the car that you have. If you have to have a co-housing, you use a washing machine that you have. If you have to put together a place for elderly, you use all the devices that you already have. But when these things consolidate, we have seen, and now we have bikes that are designed for the bike sharing. So when the idea is sufficiently solid, you have to design also the physical products. And this is happening in every single area in which you can deal with. So I use only these three, but we can continue. There is no one solution. It depends case by case. And what you have to do, to be short, is on one way infrastructuring. That means to create conditions to make things happen that you don't know at the beginning what it will be, but have some affordance inside that help people to move in a direction of collaboration, mutual listening, etc. And also plug in this system some ideas that can generate new ideas, that can feed new conversation, make something else happen. And yes, I think that is the best that I can say in short time.
Thank you. I think it's a massive dialogue that's essentially a symposium over a couple of days rather than kind of a short hour. So I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, Bethany, if she can launch the first poll. These are just to take a temperature test of the room. So what should designs do to trigger and support? And then we'll get the answers if you wouldn't mind voting. So we're going to move now to the questions. The viewers, thank you for joining us once again, that have put, and one from Niliana. So excuse me if the pronunciation is not correct, but how do we deviate from the typical method of sort of thinking about sustainable futures? So in the short descriptor, they describe, that a number of students and people are turning to biomaterials or just looking at cycles of reuse. How do we deviate from this kind of process and method to really broaden what we think is a new wave of sustainable futures? Because I think communities of place, they're very interlinked. And for me, the 10-minute city is everything, because it's actually thinking about mass manufacture, distribution, collection. It's all of that, but in a very, very simple way. So going back to it, how do you think we can broaden our definition of thinking about what sustainable futures are within the context that we've been talking about?
Well,
it's a good question.
Let's say on one side, there is a vision. And maybe I could project my own experience, but we are at least 30 years after that we started to work on design for sustainability. And there is something that is clear. For instance, it's clear that a sustainable society has to be resilient. Now it's clearer than before. So we have to talk about a resilient, sustainable society. And the resilient system have to be distributed. And distributed is a little bit technical, but all the story of the 10-minute city is one of the many way to translate a technical term, distributed system, that become distributed society, distributed technology, distributed. So you can distribute everything. Distribute means to bring everything that is possible nearer to each other, and of course, to be open and connected. Once upon a day, already 20 years ago, I used this term that was SLOC, small, local, open, and connected. So the SLOC was many years ago, but it's still in the reality, this is still what remains. So we have to think small, local, open, and connected. And afterward, it's not so complicated. So it's very complex. So we should have a discussion about complication and complex. It's very complex, but it's not complicated. You understand. So it's a direction. It has to be, if you, let's say, for every project you can say, after my project, where the power will be, where the money will be, and where the knowledge will be. If you are projecting something that is a kind of pump, that take the power, the money, and the knowledge from the local and bring it somewhere in the big companies, it's wrong. If you do something that brings back some power, some knowledge, and some, what was the third? Yes, knowledge, and power, and money, of course, you see, I'm so out from this, and money, more inside the circle, locally, in principle, you are not in the wrong direction because you are creating something that is more resilient and also is more potentially democratic because people can have a look on what is happening. So on one side, you have to have a big vision. On the other side, and I know that now I will be misunderstood, you have to reinterpret what does it mean systems. Because a lot of people interpret system as everything is connected with everything else, so we have to keep in account of everything. And so you are overwhelmed by this number of elements that you should. And so at the end, you don't use your creativity. You are doing life cycle analysis, analysis of everything. Somebody has to do this kind of analysis, but not us. So my school, the school in which I'm part of in dealing with complexity, says that we have to have a kind of strategic approach to complexity. We cannot pretend to control everything because in any case, even if we consider 100 of variable, we cannot control because the intrinsic nature of complexity is that nobody can control it. So you have to relax. You cannot control. Nobody can control. And therefore, what you have to do is to choose strategically how you intervene in the reality to create the more that you can of something that with your limited capability to look the reality, you assume that goes in what you choose ethically as the good direction. Afterward, what will happen? Nobody knows. Because this is complexity. We should know all the implication and what will happen in time, in 10 years, 20 years, nobody can do it. And therefore, we have to take our modest responsibility. So what I can see, I have some principle, I can see something, and if I am a designer, I have to find what are the power in which I can leverage to make something happen, and to try to insert, to plug in the system, or to put in the system some enzyme that permit to make something hopefully positive happen. And to be so positive, to think that even though I don't see everything, many other people will do like me. And so what emerge could be an overall movement toward a better condition. So not to be overwhelmed by complexity. To recognize deeply complexity means to be capable, to be modest, and to say, I can act only on something, and I do my best for what I can see from my standpoint to move in the right direction. And afterward, to be flexible, to listen, to be capable to see the feedback, so to have what I call a dialogical approach, so be capable to change your position, but not that to start whatever you have to spend 3 years in analysis.
Yeah, which is a challenge. Just returning, Bethany, could you just share the results of the first poll? It's just interesting to see what people are. Okay, so the question was, what should designers do to trigger and support communities of place? 49% of you have said develop enabling infrastructures, and 25% of you said develop relational objects, and 26% of you said produce scenarios. It's just interesting to see.
It's interesting because if you, given that the logic of the relational object and scenario are similar, because both are different as an artifact, but they both as a motivation, let's say, to feed the conversation, where this infrastructure is to create platform in which people can act. And in my view, it's a very good balance in between creating new platform and feeding conversation in the way that people can progressively move in a certain direction.
Yeah. So just one more question, because I think we might have time for two, but one more question, which is, it's really good. Basically, the question is kind of dictating that, you know, during this period of COVID, a lot of people have kind of turned to very much local resources, and they've re-energized very immediate connections, especially for the production of food. And so the question is how can we build resilience in local communities in the face of public health and economic crisis? Which again is a huge, massive question. But I think it's building on that concept of locality, and then things essentially can scale. It's a comment really rather than a direct. I didn't know if you had any reflections on it.
We have already in some way, at least my personal position in technical term is the perspective of the distributed system. So the distributed system is a way to have something that works locally without being closed. So the combination of locality and openness. That is not so easy, but the answer is distributed system. That is not my invention, it exists. And in my view, what you can do, it's so many things. So everybody think, okay, we want to have, I don't know, some vegetable garden so we can feed ourselves. Of course, if we do it, it's good, but we cannot or should not to be so simplistic. So it's not only an issue of having a vegetable garden. That is very good if we have it for several reasons, but it's not that this is a solution, but it's a rearrangement. So how you can bring nearer. So for instance, to have also professional production, but nearby the city. So to create a positive interlinking between the city and who is producing food outside. And also for what regards the manufacturing, I am since now 10 years hoping that the maker movement finally discovered that it's not only an issue about using a 3D printer, but it's an issue about regenerating a chain of value. And it is true. They have been so strong, and I am so thankful with the maker movement, because they state what other people were saying 10 years or 20 years before about the possibility of having distributed production, and they have been with this energy to say you can't do everything at the corner of your street. Well, we can, And we have to do it. But to do it is not simply to have a place where with some machine. You have to create a communities, if you want, a community of production that put together different kinds of people. So we have to be capable to understand how to evolve the core idea in many different areas that could be interesting not only for very, very small group of people, but also for more people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think which leads on to one last question that I just want to sort of make it really apparent that there are a lot of questions coming in, so thank you so much, but it's one that I think is very important at this time, in this day and age, and I'm just going to read it out because it's quite long. So it's in your approach to community of place, how do you account for the potentially neo-colonial actions of the creative social professional class, including academics, who project their ideas onto the community?
Yes, I thanks. So it's not easy. I will say the story about design, the story about social innovation, design for social innovation, has at least 15 years now. And at the beginning, all of us were naive. And now, after 15 years, luckily, we learned something. And there is all a group of people that frequently pose this question. So all this story is maybe neo-colonial. So you are projecting ideas that comes from Europe or North America to other people that have other culture. Others says, yes, but the ones that are active are only small groups. So maybe the small groups that are more active are in some way projecting on other their own ideas. And I think that to have somebody that makes this kind of question is very positive, because oblige the one that have been more involved in this story. And I have no doubt that we have been, I've been very naive at the beginning, so astonished to what happened that we was not capable to be very critical, and now we have to be critical. And my answer, my short answer is in relation to the fact that there are few people that are more active, maybe they cannot involve everybody. Yes, but this is the way in which society goes. And but in general, so the change are done, so I don't know, the people of, how's it called, Extinction Rebellion, they have a real theory. I don't have the theory, but they have the theory that 5% of population are capable to make the change. I'm not saying in that very precise way, but I'm saying that there is a kind of dynamism in the society. And so there are some people that have to be more active. We have not the time to do it, but when we really discuss how we create this community, we say, okay, the community have to have a coalition that are the ones that are more active, blah, blah, blah. In any case, I think the society is not flat. So in the society, you have different kind of groups, different kind of activities. And I think that in a moment like this, we have to help the ones that are willing to be more active. On the fact that frequently this started by people that are middle class. So one of the critique is that this is a story for the middle class. It's not for the real poor. It is true, totally true, but sometimes ideas can happen, especially when you talk about social innovation, where they can happen. Because you can have a place that is full of problems, so full of problems that there are no solutions, no internal solutions. So to have an internal solution, you need to find some energy on which to leverage. And therefore, one example that I always do is the one of slow food. Sorry if I do not explain what it is, but I think that many people know it. When slow food started, it was mainly for food for people rich, let's say, to protect some kind of craftsman way of cultivating and transforming. It was mainly for rich or middle class. Okay. Nevertheless, this was 35 years ago. And 35 years ago, nobody was saying that the food could be slow. Nobody was saying that there was some food that come from the tradition that was to be the best food for the future. So they started where it was possible to start. And after now, they are not only slow food, luckily afterward many other came, but now the discussion about a food that could be organic, local, etc., is not anymore only for the middle class. Maybe it's yet still not for everybody, but not for. So we are now trying to see better what does it mean to open more, to blah, blah, but I am not stigmatizing. If it is English, it's English, stigmatizing. Sometimes I invent terms, sorry for the audience.
Allowed.
It's a very creative Italian English. So in any case, the fact that an idea comes from some rich people. If the idea that comes from rich people could break some standardized way, the mainstream way of thinking, for me it's so correct. And afterward, it could be modestly my role or the role of somebody in between you to help this idea to be more accessible and to become possible for the other. Finally, the one about Western versus other. Well, this is a very huge discussion. I can also advertise that as a basis, we have one stream of activities called Philosophy Talk, and we have had started a very interesting stream of discussion that called Politics of Nature. And the last one that was based in Colombia with several people. The most known one could be Arturo Escobar. The discussion was what are the different cultures, the Western and the other culture, in relation to creating this kind of worlds. And I can be criticized, but this is my position at the moment. I am super interested to listen, but I have been formed in the Western culture. So my goal is to change the Western culture. And the Western culture can change also because we listen to the other, but I cannot enter in the shoes of a person living in the middle of Amazon. I can help, if I can, to give them voice, yes. I can listen and maybe also to learn something, yes. But it will be an evolution of the Western culture. And therefore, if in between the audience there are people that instead of being Western, they are Chinese, okay, they will start from the Chinese roots. And if there is somebody that comes from some indigenous group, they will come from there. And each one of us has to come from what Latour called soil, that is where we are. And we cannot escape that. And I would say we should not try to escape, because the quality of the future culture has to be polyverse, has to be multiple, has to be in ecology of culture. So I have to change the anthropocentric, colonialist, masculist Western culture from the Western culture. This is me that talk. If talk a Chinese, he will do it from a, so he will be do something from a different point of view. And if you are from Aborigine in Australia, from an Aboriginal Australian. But the best that I can do is to try to change my Western culture. So what I'm saying is Western, yes. Is Western offered to the others and open to have dialogues.
Thank you, Ezio. So we're just wrapping up, and this is my final comments. I mean, I've been writing notes myself. I'd just like to say that thank you. I think a couple of things that come out of, you know, how we design for the dietary result and the side effects of sociability. I think these are really important meta level themes that we can cascade to what we're doing. And these are all built around, you know, small, local, open and connected. I think the one thing that I know in all of our conversations that we've had that I just want to reinforce, especially to the audience, is just we're all learning how to do this better. And I think with every step it grows and advances and expands, and also provides feedback loops to do this again within wider size. So I think these insights are exponential and they'll continually grow. So I think Joe has some final comments, but thank you so much for sharing these really rich insights. We've tried to get to all the questions that we can, but there have been a lot. I'm sure there's one anonymous, maybe it's one of my students keeping going. But thank you so much for your time and sharing these really rich opinions. I think the more that we talk about these challenges, the better. I think the more that we share this information, the better we can build resilience. And I think understanding these definitions of communities, what happens in certain places, allows us to grow, because we're completely different. We're in a completely different world, and it's going to shift pretty quick. So the experience and expertise is very welcome. So thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you to you, and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, or you would like to connect directly with the executive education team and the speakers, please use the contact information on this slide. Please follow us on social media at RCA Short Courses on Twitter and Instagram, and make sure to check our event webpage for upcoming in-session talks and how to register for free. Again, the information is on this slide. We'll make the recording available next week. Thank you for your time, and goodbye.